phenomenal.
Yeah, and that makes it. I mean, people don't realize how big that is. You can't just take somebody else's recipe and recreate it because all the.
That's why I don't worry about people recreating my recipes. You can't.
No.
You don't have my palate. You don't have my honey. You don't have my bees.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have my area. So, you might have your own bees, but your bees in Seattle aren't going to be the same as my bees in New York. I always get a very light, fresh honey that really works out great and really comes through, and it shines like when I made the ghost pepper meads all those times. It really balances against the heat. And, the 2 recipes that I'm going to make with Sergio, one of them we're probably going to use my honey to make it. And the honey makes the recipe. The balance has to be there, but the honey makes the recipe.
Yeah, it does. Joe is saying, Bobby, that you're like a superhero. Not Batman, though. More like Aquaman.
I don't know about that.
You haven't got the hair.
David is saying that the water matters, too, when you're recreating recipe.
It does.
So, I totally understand the whole sharing a recipe here. You want to try making it your way? Sure, but it's not going to be the same as what I made.
Yeah. Well, and as long as we're on this... Go ahead, Bobby. Sorry.
All organics, every time we use organics, the organics are different.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So the honey's different every year. Your fruit is different every year. If you get fresh fruit, it's different every year. If it's a dry year, is it a wet year? The temperature difference. There's tons of factors. So you might be able to get the same things every year from the same suppliers, but they're all going to be different. And that's where your palate comes in. Where you have to go back and do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, going back to the water thing, that's huge because, I mean, everybody's water is different. Some people are using distilled water. Some people are using tap water. Some people are using reverse osmosis. A lot at the pro level, there's a lot of the reverse osmosis stuff going on. Sergio, aren't you doing that?
As far as I know, I'm the only one that I know of that's been doing RO water.
No, there's several meaderies that are doing
all
RO.
RO.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them that are doing it now. I ran across 4 or 5 when I was going around the country, but but that's like picking up speed. And I mean, I use water right out of the tap, but I have a well with particularly good water. I'm not on a city system.
Mm-hmm.
And I use water right out of the tap, and I am on a city system, and it's not bad.
It's funny. I was just listening to a Japanese chef who was trying to make the dashi stock in Paris back in the 80s, and the water in Paris was so hard that he couldn't extract the flavor from the kombu, that seaweed that they use to make the dashi stock. And basically, it really depends on the softness or hardness of your water can really make a difference in how much flavor is extracted from the ingredients you're using.
Yeah, it is what it. I mean, but some things more than others, for sure. I mean, in the beer world, water chemistry is everything. You can't make a pilsner with soft water. You can't, or hard water. You can't make certain styles like with the wrong water profile. It throws everything off. The homebrew club that I was in here in Jersey, I mean, there's these 2 brothers that basically brew for a living, homebrew for a living. They have their whole calendar year planned out as far as what they're going to brew, when they're going to rack, when they're going to bottle. These guys actually went into it and even brought some side-by-side comparisons. We did a blind tasting. Different beer styles with different water profiles. Well, the same beer style with different water profiles, 2 different side-by-sides. And, I mean, it's night and day.
Yeah.
So beer is a lot more important. I honestly don't think, besides using extremely hard water, that water plays too big of a role as far as mead making goes. You want good water. I mean, if you have good water, then your mead will be fine. But some people kind of claiming that you should never use distilled or never use RO water. It's so far like I don't know if it's anecdotal or just opinions out of nowhere, but it's
those kind of absolutes are useless, because you never use this or that. It's just ridiculous.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
they
I mean,
literally
extremely hard
wrote
water is definitely going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They literally wrote a book about water for beer. I mean, there's a whole
For
book
beer, yeah.
for beer
Yeah.
about the water,
Yeah.
what water you need.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've seen
I see another triangle test there.
Yeah. It may or may not be the fourth. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I've even heard it talked on the show. I think it was between, Ryan and Hamish were going back and forth talking about, how RO water kind of, forget exactly the details on molecular level for the yeast cells, the yeast walls, kind of like, maybe it does make a difference on, the biology side of things, but the end result doesn't. I use all RO water, and the end result is great.
See, I haven't
Well,
had
using RO water gives you a certain consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not,
sure,
you can take pretty much any water and run it through an RO system, and you get pretty much the same thing on the other end.
So, Ryan, what was the conversation about water and yeast cell walls? Ryan? Hello? Did we lose Ryan?
Right? I think he's gone. I don't see him anymore.
Oh, yeah. Oh, shoot. Well, let's add him back again. Put him back in the system here. He must have dropped. He'll text me sometimes, and it's like I don't see his text necessarily because I'm looking at the other screens. But, yeah, I know the water makes I talked to a lot of different people when I was on the trip this summer, and there's a lot of different takes on water, a lot of different takes on water, and, and what works. And of course, I was at city meaderies and country meaderies and, big metro meaderies and small town meaderies and all with different water systems. Some of them were on wells, some of them were on city water. It was all over the map. So it's, it's interesting to see, how it affects things. Ryan, did you make it back in?
I did. I lost my internet for some reason.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we were just talking about water and mead making, and Sergio harked back to the commentary that you had on water and its effects on yeast cell walls.
Well, RO water.
Or RO water, yeah. And I just wanted to revisit that.
Well, that's interesting. I was over at Steve Paddock's house today with some meads and tasting some of my stuff, and I was watching him make some of his meads, and just the other day on Facebook I posted how it'd be way cool if we could sit around, a group of different mead makers, and each one go through step by step their process in very fine detail, and also explain why they think that these different points are necessary. And we were talking about that very same thing. And I guess the most important thing I think is that, and I don't know the language to use for this. In fact, Sergio, I was going to send you a piece tonight to have you look it over and see if it made sense. But I think that one of the reasons that Scott's Labs tell us to make the appropriate amount of water based on our Go Firm ad is because they're really trying to create a specific hardness level in the water with the different, ingredients in the Go Firm, so that when the yeast actually start to blossom and fill up with water, that there's not either too much water rushing inside the cell to try to create homeostasis, or vice versa. The cell. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what it was. I was trying to remember exactly what that point was that was brought up in a previous episode, but that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, if you have now, I don't know about reverse osmosis water, but with distilled water, there's no particulates in the water, and so as soon as the yeast cell starts to open up, because the high gradient of nutrients or particles in the yeast cell versus none on the outside, they want to create an equal balance there. And so what that causes it to do is the cell wall ruptures and all the guts get spilled out into the distilled water when it's trying to equalize each other.
Yeah,
and
RO
so
is
the
the same.
reason,
It's
right?
RO is
Well, I
just
didn't
pure
know
water.
that, but
Yeah.
and I know that that's why with the for Mead O, they tell you to use 20 times the amount of water that you used of the Go Firm. That's because then if you do that, as they say, your water is at that perfect level when the cell starts to open up and rehydrate. There's not a rush of anything trying to run into the cell, and nor is there a rush for anything to rush out of the cell to try to create the equilibrium. And so that's why it's really quite important to do that piece correct, or you're going to screw up your yeast cells.
Yeah, so what you're saying essentially is as long as you're using the proper ratio of Go Firm, that the 20 times the weight of water to Go Firm and the 1.25 times the amount of Go Firm to yeast, your slurry, your yeast rehydration slurry is pretty much going to be safe no matter what water you do use.
Yes, I do believe that that's the case, and that's why they specifically say 20 times so that you get that exact hardness level that coincides with what the yeast want to have based on what the guts that are inside of those, how they're gut loaded when they're made. And so, yeah, that's why we want to do it the way they say, so that there's not that transfer of water through either inside or to the out or outside to the in and mess up the cell wall.
Yeah. I've got a good question for you now, since you're on the show tonight. What are you? Have you seen or heard any of the talks about taking the amount of yan that Go Firm, the Go Firm that we're using to rehydrate our yeast, is adding to our meads? I've seen, somebody wrote a paper on a site basically, kind of stating that, none of us are taking the yan from the Go Firm into consideration. We're kind of overfeeding it. Yeah.
Right.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, and so I believe it was Jim Davis that talked to the Indian woman that works for Scott's Labs, and I believe her reply was, and I'll try to find that and send it to you, Sergio. But I know the reply was, it's not of enough significance for us to really, concern ourselves with trying to figure that into our equation.
Yeah, that's what all of my information, all of my experience and information says the same thing. It actually got me to the point where I actually do want to take some readings, some test readings. So I do have a titrator, a formal titrator, so we can take yan readings in house. So my experiment is basically going to be I'm going to make a yeast slurry, with the yeast and the 1.25 times by weight of Go Firm and the 20 by weight of water. I'm going to take a yan reading of that slurry itself, and then I'm going to take a yan reading of the must by itself. Then I will take a yan reading of the must with the yeast slurry added into it, and then take a fourth yan reading 24 hours after yeast pitch before we would be adding our first nutrient addition.
Right.
Just to kind of see, okay, how much yan is already naturally existing in the must, so we could actually kind of, deduct that. We're not really taking that into consideration either with, I'm not taking into consideration with Asma at all. The highest I've ever seen of natural yan reading, even with the darkest honeys, we're getting maybe about 30, 35, maybe 40 parts per million.
Right.
But you're not going to get that most of the time either. But it would be kind of interesting, at least to have some hard data on that. Because you got me thinking,
that's interesting.
Is this an issue? Is this an issue? I kind of want to know for a fact now.
Well, that's interesting. I just you have the Hannah and I have the Vinmetrica, but I just ordered the same piece that I just say that I'll be able to do yan calculation or, yan measurements with my machine. And so I was going to do the very same thing.
Perfect. That saves me a lot of time.
Well, so we can compare notes, I guess, is what we might learn something if each of us do it. And I think Jim Davis has that as well, and I think Carvin has that piece for his because I think he has the same unit that you have.